Good morning and welcome Men's Leadership Network. Welcome Cool Springs at Bricks. Welcome Nolensville, Highway 55, and downtown at Flavor Catering, and of course here in the room in Franklin. If you have questions throughout our interview today, you can tweet your questions in at leadership_net or email them at questions@mensleadershipnetwork.com. And today we're excited to welcome Dr. Brad Dennis to the MLN stage. Brad received his undergraduate at the University of Georgia. After medical school, he completed his residency in general surgery at the Medical Center of Central Georgia in Macon, then finished his surgical training with a fellowship at Vanderbilt in the trauma surgery and surgical care, critical care unit. He is currently an assistant professor of surgery at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. His clinical practice involves trauma surgery, emergency general surgery, and surgical critical care. He's part of 12 trauma surgeons that staff one of the busiest trauma centers in the country, admitting more than 4,000 trauma patients every year, nearly half of which require ICU admission. In addition to patient care, Brad is heavily involved in trauma education, which makes him a perfect fit to talk to us today about how to handle tragedy that comes through in life. He serves as the director of the Vanderbilt Trauma Outreach Education and Injury Prevention Program. In this capacity, he's involved in teaching many different trauma care courses to various groups, from trauma surgeons and surgical residents to paramedics and to the non-medical public. He is passionate about teaching skills to medical and non-medical provider in an effort to limit the tragedy of preventable death due to trauma. In his free time, Brad enjoys spending time with his wife, Kristen, and his 3 children who are actively involved in youth sports and theater. And we are pleased to welcome to the stage our friend, Dr. Brad Dennis.
Awesome, Brad. It's great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So glad you're here, man. Appreciate it. So, Brad, I mean, incredible introduction. You know, I mean, you've done a lot in the medical field. How did God lead you into the medical field?
Well, I think God actually started through my father. He, when I was, growing up, he always encouraged me to do. I guess he recognized that I had math and science aptitude, and so he always sort of nudged me in that direction. Talked about engineering and medicine, and really sort of said, you can do whatever you want, just don't do business. And so he sort of was probably the first that really introduced me to it, and that's what kind of led me into the medical field. But once I got into the medical field, I think what I really see the fingerprints of God when I see what led me to trauma surgery. And so for me, I finished medical school, and I actually wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon, and was not able to land a residency spot in ortho, and so I went down the general surgery route, and through a number of issues, found myself really in a position where I didn't really have a job for the upcoming year. And that's where God started opening doors in my life and led me to Macon, as you heard, where I did my general surgery residency. And so it was in Macon where I first really learned that I loved trauma. I loved taking care of ICU patients. And then that's where I decided that what I wanted to spend my life doing. God then led us up here to Vanderbilt, where I did my fellowship training in trauma and emergency general surgery specifically. And so our plan was always to come up here for 2 years, finish fellowship, and then we'd go back to Georgia where I'd been born and raised. And God had other plans for us, and we were welcomed here in the community and at the church, and it became obvious that God's plans for us were to stay here to do trauma. And so that's, I guess, how I feel like I was led and put where we are now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, why is this so important to you? I mean, you've seen this kind of blossom in your life. You said ortho at first, and then how you got into more trauma. I mean, that's kind of a tough field, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's, a lot of people say that, I could never do what you do. I sort of say that about a lot of things other people do. And so I think that's really why I think that's so important to me, is that it's clear to me that this is what God wanted me to do. This is the area that I'm, where my gifts are. I'm able to do those, take care of those patients in those settings, and really provide them the care they need. And so for me, that's, it's this combination or the crossroads of what I think is God's will for me and my passions and my interests. And so it makes it, definitely makes it easier for me to get up and go to work every day because it's something that I love doing and it's something that I'm good at. Or I think I'm good at, and so it's I think that's why this is something that I think is important.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, when we can get into that intersection, right, with God's will and our passions, the way He wired us, it's not a job anymore. Then it's a calling, and it's something you want to be a part of.
Right.
And really, and I think that's for every man just trying to get into that sweet spot and live that way is our calling. So tell me some of the things in your medical training that impacted your relationship with the Lord? Because there's a lot of people who get into, the medical field or in the sciences and they kind of move away from God, but yet you press deeper into your relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, I think for me, the more that I learned, about the physiology, the anatomy, the biochemistry of, the human body, the more self-evident God becomes, and I think that you learn, there's just no way that, how integrated everything in our, even down to our individual cells. There's just, all the systems and organ systems of the body. There's just no way that that's a random chance, that it's a fortunate combination of mutations or whatever, people want to talk about. I mean, I think it's exactly like Paul said in Romans 1, that God made Himself self-evident to the world, to the natural world. And I think that the more I learned about medicine and the human body, the more that became very evident to me.
Wow. You see that in the field? Because I read something the other day that like 51% now of scientists would say there is a higher power, or intelligent design. I mean, whatever word they want to use, because I do think you see that more and more. Now we hear the other side of that where people push away and we start to trust in our own knowledge. But do you see that in the medical field, or do you see like more people kind of pushing away?
I see both, for sure. I definitely feel like, especially at an academic medical center, you definitely see a lot of people who don't want to, acknowledge what I think is self-evident. You see a lot of people who, and I think a lot of that may be a little bit egocentric in that they want to feel like they have more control over, the outcomes of the patients than we probably really do have. But there's also a lot of people there who definitely acknowledge, the role of God and Jesus and what we do every day. And I'm fortunate that I have some partners who do have the same, views about it that I do, and we talk a lot about that. And it is an important part of what we, how we carry ourselves and in the work we do.
Well, I'm thankful for you. I tell you, having a godly doctor makes a ton of difference, and I've seen that in my own life. I've seen that, pastoring a church and at the hospitals a lot, and somebody who cares and somebody who has a greater vision. So when you talk about ICU, when you talk about trauma, what are some of the things that you've seen out there, some of the challenges or even difficulties that you've seen?
Yeah, for me, the hardest part of what I do is, I think, has got to be taking care of young people with severe brain injuries. That group in particular is a group that strikes a chord with me, and a lot of that has to do with my past. My brother is a survivor of traumatic brain injury. And as a side note, I think the timing of this interview is fortunate or fortuitous. Yesterday was Trauma Survivors Day nationwide, and so my brother is a trauma survivor, and so that was when he was 18. He was a victim of a severe TBI. He spent 45 days in the ICU, and so it was that's a group that's sometimes tough to deal with, for sure, especially when they have parents there, that are attentive and remind me a lot of my own, parents. It definitely brings back a lot of memories. And now that I have, 3, younger kids, I think about, that could be me, and that could be any of us. And that makes it, those are challenging sometimes in that regard, for sure.
Yeah. So how do we as men, I mean, we talk about being prepared for tragedy, but we do live in a fallen world, and it does seem like more and more every time we turn the news on, we pull up and online, there's another mass shooting, there's another tragedy, there's something that's happening. How do we prepare for these kind of things in the world that we live in today?
So yeah, this is, I think, an area that I have some special interest in. You and Chase know this as well, because I came here and there's a course that I actually teach, or that we teach at Vanderbilt, that's called a bleeding control course, and it's a course designed for people without medical backgrounds, to provide them with some skills that could help them in these situations. So let me back up a little bit and tell you a little about the course. It started after the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012. So a group of a number of important organizations nationwide, the American College of Surgeons, American College of Emergency Physicians, the Surgeon General, the FBI, a number of police and fire organizations, and the Department of Defense all convened a group known as the Hartford Consensus, and they came up with basically an action plan to deal with what they felt like was a rising need for, to do something, related to the number of mass shootings that were occurring in this country. And so a couple things came out of that, and one of them is the bleeding control course. And you guys know, now that you're certified, and some of those skills, basically from in general, backing up to people who are not medical providers, the first things that I think you should understand is that, the first thing you should do is you should always run from it. There's no reason, if as somebody who doesn't have the skills as a law enforcement officer and is not, there for that purpose, the first thing you should just protect yourself. So you run, and if you can't run, then you hide. And if you can't hide, then that's when you have to make, the tough decision about, are you in a position to do something to fight back, right? So that's the first tenet. And then beyond that, we talked about some of the specific skills in terms of tourniquets for people who have injuries to their arms and legs, but then also even things like just holding pressure and packing wounds on ones that you can't control bleeding with. So those are some of that's certainly how I think that that's the things that people can do in the midst of a mass shooting. But I think the important one is that you protect yourself, you protect those around you first.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good to know, because as men, right, we want to step in and we want to help. And so when you see something like, I remember watching the Boston Marathon, and when the bomb went off, and then watching the people flee, but also watching the, police officers running toward that. And I think as men, our natural tendency is but we don't know. Definitely. I mean, if we're not in the medical field, when we get there, we're not sure what to do.
Right.
So trying to be prepared for something like that is important.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. Having this, understanding who are the people that need to run to that chaos, who are the ones that maybe should step back. Do you have the skills to be able to help in that setting? I think is definitely, important.
And it's not just in mass shootings, right? I mean, there's car wrecks, and there's all kinds of times where we come upon a tragedy.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, I think, one of the important points of the course is that while, it came about as a result of a mass shooting, you're much more likely to see that, driving your car on the highway, right? You're much more likely to see it at the ballpark, something like that, in terms of somebody having just an injury, not necessarily a victim of violence.
Yeah. So how do we prepare? I mean, like, if we don't have the opportunity to take the course, how do we prepare? Because, when you're in the Army, right, they prepare you for, hey, you're going into war. And I don't think we all wake up thinking, hey, I'm going into battle today. But I do think we need to have a mindset of, I do live in a fallen world. There are tragedies that are going to happen. How do we prepare ourselves for living in this kind of world today?
Sure. To me, there's a couple of components to that. To the preparation, and the first one I think is it all kind of comes down to getting your house in order. And so the first thing is on the front end, the preparation in terms of making sure that your family is taken care of if things happen that are tragic, and you or someone is dies or is out of work for an extended period of time. So that's disability insurance, life insurance, making sure that you have a will that's updated, and that but I think all of that kind of comes down to having a conversation with your family about what are the things that are important to each of you, particularly as it relates to your medical care or in something like that where you're not able to make your own decisions. And so we want to make sure as medical providers that we do the things that are most in line with our patients' wishes. And so the things that help us do that are when those wishes are well known, when they've had those conversations, whether they've written them down in a form of an advance directive or a will or not, or they've just had those conversations with their loved ones. So I think that's that's certainly one thing that everybody should do. I think the other thing, is we've talked about some of the skills, a bleeding control course, education, in terms of being able to provide aid is certainly, another component of that. CPR, those kinds of things are useful as well. And then the third one, I think, is having your heart in order, having your internal house in order, right? And so understanding, I think building your relationship with God, placing your trust and your faith in God. I think as we see these things in our, go on in the world, and we see them on the news every day, it can certainly generate a lot of fear and anxiety, and so that can be crippling. And I think that it's important that if we put our faith in God and our trust in God, that He is going to protect us, and that He's going to put us in situations that are that He's designed for us, right? That He has a plan, so that if we do face those tragedies, we realize that we're not in it alone. We have someone to lean on, someone that we can put our faith and trust in, but also understand that this isn't a punishment for us, that this is part of God's plan, that He's building and shaping us when these things happen. And I think that is something that we certainly learned in my family when we went through our trials with my brother. And I think it's important for people to realize, because I think, if you, my wife and I were talking about this last night, if you had to face these sorts of tragedies and these sorts of situations without having a faith in God, to me, that would be, I don't know how you would do it. I mean, if you had nothing to look to a better beyond, nothing beyond this incident, whether it's death or, significant injury, to know that at some point things were going to be better. If you had no hope for that, that would be, I don't know how you would do that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably, the most important thing that you can do to prepare yourself.
That's strong. I'm telling you, Brad, waking up every day and just saying, I need to be in the Lord. I need to be living for Him today, reading God's word, prayer. I think that's how you prepare for, we want to be fixers, right? As men, we want to fix everything, but really to rely on the strength of the Lord.
Exactly.
And put our faith in Him. That's how we're prepared for the day or for whatever comes.
Absolutely.
That's important. Have you seen a difference in families who are walking through these kind of tragedies, who know the Lord and who don't? I mean, do you see that in the emergency room or in trauma centers?
I think you do. And so definitely. And I think the difference is how they approach, death and dying of their family members or loved ones. And so part of what we do, our goal, particularly in the ICU, but in the trauma world as well, is we're trying to preserve life. We're not trying to prolong dying. And so part of that, if we, what we want to do is do everything we can to give the person back as close to their previous injury life as they can. Once we determine that that's not possible, or it's not going to be something that, what we need to do that is to know what is acceptable quality of life for them. What's the sort of things that they would be happy, being able to do. And that's different for everybody. And once we're able to determine that, and we say, so what the quality of life that this patient's going to have is not going to be acceptable to them if they were here having this conversation with us, then I think what we have to do is make some decisions that are sometimes difficult. And the families that handle those best, I think, are the ones that are able to remove their own self-interests from the equation. And that's hard to do, because certainly selfishly, we want to do everything for our family members. We want to give them everything, every medically available treatment we want to give them, and we want to do everything we can do to keep them alive. And it's important that we remove ourselves from that in those situations. And when we say, and this is the conversation that I frequently, unfortunately, have to have with families, is if your loved one was sitting here, what would they say that they would want? What would be an acceptable life for them? What would their wishes be if they were able to speak for themselves here? And so the families that are able to do that and say, despite what I want, this is really what he would want or what she would want to do, then those are the people that make that help us make the decisions that we think are best for or most in line with the patient's wishes. And so then we're able to, so sometimes that is, hey, he'd want to do everything. He would want to, he'd want to give this a long time, and let's see if he could pull out of this. Or some say, if this was going to be a long recovery, if he felt like he was going to be a burden to a family, or he was going to be, live his life in a nursing home, that's not what he would want. It's not what she would want. And so then we can transition to us trying to, heal and restore life, to saying, well, let's focus on comfort. Let's make them comfortable. Let's allow family to be with them. And I think those families that, understand, God and Jesus, and that there is something more to look to beyond this world, I think they're able to make those decisions a little bit more easily and a little bit more readily than those that really only kind of live in the here and now and there, so that it's harder for them to get outside of their own selfish interests.
Wow, that's strong. And the hard part to think about is, as men, at some point in our lives, we're going to be facing those decisions, and we'll be the ones that people will be looking to, for our parents or grandparents or aunts, uncles, or, we sit in that seat a lot of times. And so hearing you talk, man, it's hard, right? It's sobering, but at the same time, it's also like, okay, I'm going to be prepared for that. And I think, to your point earlier, spiritually, that's the important thing, is that we're prepared spiritually for whatever happens.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And you're right. We're guaranteed to be in that situation, right? 100% of us are going, unfortunately, to deal with death.
Yeah.
Our own or somebody else's. So we're guaranteed to deal with it. And I think being prepared and understanding, that there is something beyond what's here on earth is I think, important.
So if I could kind of recap, so being prepared for tragedy, I'm hearing you say, spiritually, make sure every day you're ready, because we don't know when things are going to happen.
Right.
2, get your house in order. And talk about that for a second, because you mentioned disability. What are those things that you think, from a doctor, that you would say to people, hey, if you are a husband, a father, these are things you need to really be prepared for?
I think as men and leaders of our household, we want to provide for our families, right? And so financially, we want to be able to provide for them. And so what you don't want to do is find yourself in a situation where you're injured, traumatically injured, and are unable to provide for your family, and then they're not able to make ends meet, right? And so that's where, to me, life insurance, enough that you can, pay off your debts, you can provide education for your children, that's essential. And disability insurance, if it's not, obviously if you survive your injuries, but you have a prolonged recovery period, you need to be able, you're going to have a lot of bills, you're still going to have the existing bills that you had before, your house payments and those sorts of things. And so you want to be able to take care of those things. There was some, recently read a journal article about how frequently this does happen, where people aren't prepared for these injuries, and they refer to it, the title of the article was Curing to Destitution, because they come through these traumatic injuries, and now they're faced with financial ruin, basically, and so that's where being prepared financially, I think, is really key. And then the other side of that too is also having the conversations and having the advance directives, so that your family members know what your wishes are, but also so that you know what theirs are, so that you're able to make those decisions.
And how do you do that? As a man, how do you initiate that kind of conversation? Because that's not always easy, right?
You're right. It probably comes a little bit easier for me than it does for a lot of people. I unfortunately find myself in a lot of situations to come home and have that conversation. But I think that we're all going to be touched by death or tragedy at some point in our life, and I think those moments provide us the opportunities to have those conversations, whether it's you're there at the hospital and you're in the car on the way home, or when you get home, or even when you see it on the news. This is an opportunity to say, hey, what would you want to do if traumatic brain injury, for me, is always kind of the one that I always think about, because it can do a number of different things, right? So, if it's something that is severe enough that you're not going to survive, or that you're not going to be able to really be functional, to a level that you're okay with. So you're not going to be able to work, you're not going to be able to talk, you're basically going to be nursing home bound. Is that something that you'd want? Is that what you'd want to do? What if there was the opportunity to get better in, say, a year? If you thought, hey, I'm it's going to be a long year, but I would get through that. Is that something you'd want to do? Or what about if your kidneys failed and you had to be on dialysis, or your lungs failed and you were on a ventilator and you know, for a long, long time, you know, and maybe never come off? Are these, you know, is that something you'd want to do? Is that something that you'd be okay with us doing? You know, and it's not, it's a little bit awkward. It's certainly not a conversation that I think a lot of folks routinely have. But I mean, I think it is important, and it helps. It's essential for your family to know what sort of things that you would want.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and I think it's something that guys, we kind of avoid.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because it's like, I don't know, that's awkward to talk with my parents about that, or it's awkward to talk with my, you know, wife about that.
Right.
But it's so important, and you see it, I see it, you know, and you get the phone call, and you're devastated, you're running up to the hospital, and then you're saying, well, you know, what are their wishes? Do you get a lawyer involved in that, or is that something you just handwrite out? I mean, how do you know? Because, right, if somebody's in a coma, you don't, how do you do that?
Yeah. So, not a legal expert on that.
Right.
So, you know, I would have probably to defer to a lawyer on the legalities of it. I know certainly for a will, you know, you would usually involve a lawyer, but you don't have to have a legal document.
Okay.
To give your family the guidance to make those decisions. You know, and whether you write it on a napkin or you write it in a, you know, 35-page, you know, will, as long as your family understands what your wishes are, they're going to be the ones who are going to make your medical decisions if you're not able to make them. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that they know, mm-hmm. you know, what those are.
Mm-hmm. That's good. So you've got be prepared spiritually every day. You've got get your house in order, right? Yeah. You know, with the wills and with life insurance, disability, those things are so important. I would say the next step, and I'll just ask you about this, but I think community is a big part of this. You know, being involved in church, you know, having a community group, having friends, having people around. Mm-hmm. Because what I see on the other side of it is when people aren't involved, you know, not only is there a financial burden if they haven't taken care of the house in order, but if they have taken care of the house in order, still, if you're left with one parent trying to raise, right. you know, kids, or you're left with, I'm trying to manage somebody who's in, you know, long-term care, you need community.
Definitely. Yeah, and you're right. And that's not for you as the patient.
Yeah.
So much as it is for your family, and your friends, right? And that's definitely something that we experienced, you know, in my family was, you know, when my brother was injured, having that support there, we were at the hospital every day for a month and a half, and so having people there just to sit with you, whether you talk or don't talk, you know, and whether you're, you know, you need somebody shoulder to cry on, or just to bring you a meal, you know, like that's taking those burdens off your plate in times that, you know, that you're not able to do those things yourself is really very, very helpful. And so, yeah, I think building that community, building that network where you live is probably one of the more underrated components of it. And that's something that I routinely even think about, but definitely is essential.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And I just see that from you know, pastoral side, going to hospitals and seeing and just God's gift of church, God's gift of community, God's gift of, because we celebrate the joys together, but there's also the challenges that we face. And none of us, all of us think we're immortal, right? At this age, you know, all of us think, you know, hey, nothing's ever going to happen to me, but it does. Yeah. And that's the thing that we've got to understand, you know, being prepared spiritually, having our house in order, having community around us. Yeah. So, and then I think, you know, we kind of look at the big tragedies that happen out there, the mass shootings, but even as many have happened, it's not as a percentage as much as a car wreck or you know, what your brother went through. You know, I mean, those things happen on a more frequent basis.
Absolutely. I mean, definitely. You know, we talk about mass shootings, and you know, so one of the difficulties with mass shootings is, from a scientific standpoint, is studying them, because we're not fully allowed to study them from a political standpoint. But when you look at the numbers, however you define it, you know, you're talking about hundreds at most, 200 a year, versus auto accidents, which are hundreds of thousands a year. So you're far and away, this is the kind of tragedy you're going to deal with, is motor vehicle accidents. And even stuff more simple than that, you know, older folks who fall. Yeah. You know, and that for us in this country is a growing problem of significant proportion. I mean, we're talking that for us, that's probably 20 to 30% of our trauma admissions are older folks who fall. So, you know, even it doesn't have to be something as dramatic as a bad car accident, but that puts you in a situation where you are having to deal with tragedy and with death.
How do you personally deal with death? Because you're in the ER, you're there. And I remember when my wife's mom was rushed into the ER, and I remember going in there, and I tell you, it was tough watching,
Sure.
that whole process take place. And
Right.
those were her last days, and she's on in heaven, and praise God, and in the hope we have in Christ. I mean, I don't know how people survive without that, but how do you handle that each day?
So I think if dealing with it every day, and unfortunately, we do see, more than our share of it. I think you learn to compartmentalize, those things. And so you focus on the specific, for me as a provider, I focus on the specific injuries and what are our goals for the day? What am I trying to do for this patient? And so that's a really, to me, that's a really helpful way to look at it. If the more that I kind of detach myself from the individual injuries and sort of look at them as a whole person, the easier, first of all, you see the totality of sickness and injury that patient's getting, experiencing, and that can be in and of itself overwhelming. But then you also sort of bring in that human component to it, and so then you start to you start to think about what they were, what they are, and so that does make it difficult to focus on the job at hand. And so that's what I think we try to do. When we're in the moment, is focus on exactly what our goals are. I think as a trauma surgeon, I typically am sort of the leader of that team that's taking care of those patients. And so one of the other, I think, big roles that I play is keeping everybody else focused on the tasks at hand as well. And so I try to project calm in those moments, and whether I fully understand exactly, what are the issues we're dealing with, or whether I'm still trying to get a handle on everything that's going on, my job is to project calm. And I sort of use the analogy when I teach the residents about this of kind of a duck swimming on water, right? So above the surface, very calm, very smooth, very placid, but underneath the legs are just, a million miles an hour. And so that's sort of what's happening, is that inside there's a lot of things that are running through my head, but outside I'm trying to project calm, that we have this under control. These are the things that we're going to do, and we're going to start with, we're going to start with their airway. We're going to, assess their breathing. We're going to check their blood pressure. That's how, we're going to do this in a stepwise fashion. So we compartmentalize, we focus on individual, steps in the process. And I think that's the best and the easiest way for us to deal with it.
See, I think that is incredible truth for every man, in whatever situation you find yourself in, whether it's tragedy or whether it's something at work that just seems to be going out of control. I mean, that calm really shows the leadership in you, and it really shows, hey, I've got a greater faith that God's in control of this and God's sovereign. And, so as a man, as a leader, you've got to be the calm one. And as hard as that is inside, you're just running 100 miles an hour, you're thinking of worst case scenarios, but you've got to be the one to project that.
Right. And you definitely see, when we have those moments, particularly, I see this with some of the trainees that we work with, when they aren't projecting that calm, the room feels it, and it sort of creates, additional anxiety and additional, emotion in the room. And so the more we try to rein that in, the more we're able to effectively work.
That is so powerful for every guy here, every guy watching, I think, because, your family's going to feed off that. I mean, everybody around you is going to feed, how you handle that situation in the midst of a tragedy, in the midst of something that is unexpected. So what advice would you give us as men about being spiritual leaders?
I think that's probably one of the main ones is that, set the tone, as the spiritual leader, of your family or of your, in your group, it's you can set the tone, and you should set the tone. And so, one of the other things I think that's important as a spiritual leader is that sometimes you got to get outside your comfort zone, and you got to, you may not exactly know what you're getting into, but having faith in God that He's going to lead you, down the right path, I think is an important role or important lesson for leaders. And like I said, it may not be something that you're comfortable with, or maybe something that certainly I've never done this. I don't exactly know, how this is going to turn out. But if you feel God pulling you to do that or calling you to do that, then I think that, have the faith, have the trust in the Lord to take that step.
I love that. Because leaders lead, right? And
Right.
take initiative and
Yeah.
step out. And a lot of times we're afraid of that. But as men, that's our calling. And
Right.
and God put us as men for a time such as this. We weren't born in some other era. We were born here and now. So that's great advice. What do you want your legacy to be, Brad?
Yes, that's a tough question. So what I think there's kind of there's two sides to that I think of it. I think of it professionally, but I think of it from a family standpoint. But they all probably come they all sort of stem from the same thing. And it's that I want to reflect Christ in what I do. And I want that to reflect in the work that I do. I want people to first of all, I want to do the Lord's work, when I'm there, and I want to do it, as we've been talking in the Wholehearted series, I want to reflect the attitude of Christ, and that's, that's really my goal. I'm not always as good at it as I want to be, but I try to do that. And the same thing at home, and I want to reflect Christ's love as a father and as a husband. I try to teach my children. I want them to be leaders. From a spiritual standpoint, but also, in their lives. I think that that's really what I want my legacy to be for them.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh man, thank you for all you do too. I tell you, you just have an impact on so many people, and we pray for. I pray for all the doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners and everybody in the medical field, because that is such an important time of life, and it's a time when people are really open to what is truth and what is out there. And so just thank you for the way you live your life for Christ. So,
Thank you.
Hey, I think we've got a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
All right, Chase?
Yes, we do. The first question is, what does it look like practically for you to share Jesus, your faith in Jesus with coworkers, patients, families, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a tough one, I think, for people to navigate. And I've definitely struggled with this as well. I think that particularly as we mentioned, the academic medical world is certainly a lot less open and receptive to the message. And so for me, I try to do it with my actions, and so I don't. I think that's the best for me, the best first step. That's certainly, I'm not especially gifted in, going out and immediately finding people that, I don't know, or that, I've just recently met and sharing Jesus with them, in a conversation or asking about their faith. So I think for me, I'm most gifted in terms of mirroring, the qualities of Christ that I think are important. And then as you kind of, gauge that relationship and you sort of have those conversations, you certainly, I feel like you can tell, sort of a little bit where people are, in their faith. And so when you see those doors open or you see those opportunities, that you capitalize on those. And that's kind of, I think, how you practically, I think, is the best way for me to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it goes back to being prepared spiritually every day, right? I mean, I think if you're spending time with the Lord, if you're praying and just saying, God, use me today, then those conversations are going to come, and you're more aware of those.
Right.
And then, when to step into that and say, hey, let me share with you, the hope that I have, and I think that's important. But I think if we're not spiritually prepared every day, then there's opportunities that come and go, and there's people who are in desperate need, and it's just being open and allowing the Spirit to move through you.
Yeah.
That's a great point. You got another one, Chase?
I do, and this is a new question even on the screen. So this is, can you speak to the prevalence of miracles you witness at work?
Can you repeat that one for me?
Can you speak to the prevalence of miracles that you've witnessed in your work?
The miracles
that I've witnessed.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll give you a specific example without, revealing, protected information. But I had a case the other day, actually about 2 weeks ago now, of, I got called to the emergency room to see somebody who was bleeding to death. And when I got there, they were, actively doing CPR. He had lost his pulse, 2 separate times from bleeding. We were able to get him to the operating room. He had, ruptured his kidney, and we took his kidney out. stopped his bleeding. Even after that, he still lost his pulse another time, but was able to pull through this. And it was, I think having all of the people, I think God, brought the emergency department people together, the blood bank, the surgery team, the OR staff, and then the ICU staff together, in perfect, sequence that it really, this guy was, it was really sort of, God stuff that I was in the ER at that time to even be, happen upon this situation. So it, to me, that was a pretty crystalline example of miracle in my job. So.
Well, and I think a lot of times we try to separate out, faith from medicine, and I don't think so. I think God, in His sovereignty, has given us incredible medical people who,
right.
You pray for a miracle for your family, your brother, and you start to see all these people that God brings in, and you just go, praise God,
Right.
So I think, I think there's miracles that happen every day. It's just the way you view it, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And there are miracles that happen every day, and I think that's a good example of one we see them with, some of our, a lot of our traumatically injured patients. I think the other side of that too is I think we definitely hear a lot of families ask us, or tell us, that they're really going to be praying for a miracle, or they're wanting to see a miracle. And I think it's hard sometimes when I want that for them too. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing God telling us with the various things that are happening, this isn't that case. This isn't that time. And that's hard as well. You see it on both sides.
Yeah. And I think it's how you define it too,
yes.
right? Because for a believer, right? The life to come is going to be so much better than life here.
Yes.
And so, when, I remember like Lisa's mom, and she was older, and I'm thinking, what is that quality of life here versus what is there?
Right.
And so as much as you want her to be here, you just go, I'm going to be with her again. I know we're going to. So the miracle of God taking her home is just as a viable miracle to me, and how He does that is important, So,
right.
Yeah, it's a good perspective.
I do have one more question.
Okay, one more.
This is actually a member of our A6 care team and prayer team from our A6 men. He's asked this question. I make hospital visits a lot, and he said, how do you cope with the disappointment personally and professionally? How do you handle being the one who delivers bad news? I think this is great, even if you're outside of A6.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, one of the most important messages that we teach our residents and fellows is particularly that first one is how do you cope with that personal and professional disappointment? Certainly in trauma and emergency surgery and the ICU, one of the things that helps is that, everything that we do, everything that all the interventions that we've done are with the intent of helping. I didn't wreck that car, I didn't shoot that person, and all I'm trying to do is help. And that's I think for me, an important perspective to maintain is that, we're here to try to give people a chance that they ordinarily wouldn't have had, or, 100, 200 years ago, they wouldn't have had a chance to recover from these injuries. And so, we're in a unique position to be able to help those people. And I think that, having that perspective, really helps in those situations when you're not able to help, or when you do fight the good fight and you lose, and that doesn't make it always easy in that moment. It certainly hurts because we're invested, and we want people to get better, and we want to restore health and restore life. But when we're not able to do it, and having somebody to talk to, my wife has heard me, talk about a number of professional disappointments in terms of not being able to help people that I had invested a lot in. And so, having somebody that you can talk to that can also remind you of those things, that, you're doing the Lord's work, it's not you that did that, right? Somebody, the Lord's working through you, and you didn't hurt them. You're just trying to help them. Those are the things that I think help me cope with those disappointments. The second question: how do you handle being the one who delivers bad news? again, this is an important lesson that we teach our trainees as well, is how do you talk to families? So an important thing as doctors is that we tend to use jargon. We retreat to jargon because it's easier for us, I think, even because you don't engage quite as much when you use medical jargon as when you try to keep it, on lay terms, if you will. And so it's important to me that families understand what's happening and that they receive the information that I'm trying to get them. So delivering that bad news, I try to do it in as simple a way as I can, and not patronizing, but talking to them like if I was not a medical provider. But the other thing is, I try not to beat around the bush. I try not to take, I don't want to weave a long tale about what's been going on, because what they're going to hear is their family member died, or they are, on a ventilator. They're really not going to hear a whole lot else that you say, especially in that first conversation that you have with them. And so to me, it's, I try to get to the point with compassion and sensitivity, and using, frankly, using words that I know that they'll understand. When I'm telling people that their loved one has died, I used the word dead. I used died. I don't use passed away or didn't make it. I try to be very, I don't want to confuse them. And I think that's the other point too, is being clear about it.
Well, and I think to that question too, it's so good just to say, as men, instead of running from things, to run toward the power of presence. The power of presence, whether we have a family member or a friend or a neighbor or a coworker, a lot of times we're like, we don't know what to say, and so we don't say anything or do anything. But man, it's the people who engage and who are just there, being present, or writing a card or an email or taking a meal, or that makes all the difference. I think that's where Christ steps into those situations.
And I think assuming that they don't want to talk to me, or they don't want, there's not anything that I can really do to help this, I think is not necessarily true either. You're making assumptions without really knowing, and if everybody does that, then those people find themselves isolated.
And alone and afraid. And so we ought to be the men who engage in that. Yeah. Brad, thank you. This has been so good. Thank you. It's not an easy topic, but man, it's been something that's so powerful for us as men. Let me pray for us.
Absolutely.
God, thank you for today. And Father, we do live in a fallen world. We live in a broken world. And God, we long for the day when you make everything new and everything right. And so, Lord, in the midst of this, I pray that, Father, we would be men who spend time with you, who are prepared every day, Father, to be the hands and feet of Christ, to walk into tough situations, Father, and just to love people, and the power of presence that we walk in and share the love of Christ. And so, Lord, in a world of tragedy, Father, let us be light, and let us be love, and let us be hope, Father, in the name of Jesus. Thank you for Brad and all the doctors and the medical professionals in our community, and I pray a blessing on them today. Father, thanks for this morning. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Well, that concludes our MLN leadership for this semester. Be on the lookout today for the MLN Rewind, our email recapping today's interview with the video. And there's other links to other resources that provide. If you missed any of the MLN interviews over the past semester, or even further back than that, you can access those at mensleadershipnetwork.com. Again, this is the final week of our Men's Leadership Network for this semester, but we will be sending out additional resources throughout the summer, so be on the lookout for those in your inbox. Also, mark your calendar for September 7th when we kick off our fall semester with another great lineup of speakers and topics. If you'd like a voice on what topics to tackle this fall, please take a moment to fill out the survey on your tables, in the MLN Rewind today. You can do that. Again, thanks for joining us, and have a great day.